Good morning. Ken.
Are we back? Do we have sound? Can someone confirm?
Yes, we have sound. We have thumbs up. Woo!
All right. Well, we knew. All right, so we're good? All right. Apologies for those who have stuck with us. We appreciate it. We're having some technical difficulties, but we're working through it. I guess we're just going to take it back from the top.
Yep.
Get better every single time. So we got double thumbs up and the door's closing. So that's good. Welcome again for the third time to our DAT IQ Weekly Market Update. And if you are a good lip reader, this is super redundant at this point. But I'm Ken Animo, Chief of Analytics at DAT. And as you can see, we're all in person and trying this thing out and learning together. So since we are in person, I'm going to turn it over to my far left, and we'll do in-person intros.
I'm Cynthia O'Rourke, DS2 at DAT. I'm in the freight matching space right now.
I'm Ned Damon. I'm the Principal Data Scientist at DAT, and I'm primarily in the rating and analytics space.
And my name's Dean Croak, Freight Market Analyst at DAT.
Wonderful.
All right. So just to kind of re-level set here. If you have any questions, please drop those in the comment or chat below. That really is the cornerstone of our show and what we really like doing the most. And since we're all here in person, you get to see less lag with our witty banter. So please, we have folks feeding that over to us, and we're happy to answer them. With that, I'm going to jump right into our key trends of the week. And let's walk through those. So dry van rates are flatlining, but reefer and flatbed are down a little bit. Again, we talked a little bit when we didn't have sound about how flatbeds are probably closely mirroring what would be happening with dry vans and reefers had that Class 8 capacity entered the market and not been backlogged due to COVID part shortages. Cash shipments are down a bit, but the contract rates are still rising. Again, there's some weird seasonal adjustment, I think, or lack of seasonal adjustment. I can't remember which. ATA and CAS do it a bit differently. So just keep that in mind when looking at this data. The big story, though, is ports. So vessels at anchor, lack of chassis, lack of container capacity, kind of disruptions over in China. They had a port shutdown due to a single coronavirus case was at Ningbo.
Correct.
Yeah. And then all the way down through drayage and transloading capacity and cross-dock capacity are all extremely tight right now, which not great timing with all the Christmas decorations and stuff like that coming over. Lastly, we've been mentioning this for a while. Brake Safety Week is coming up next week. Always check your brakes, but more importantly, check them for next week. And as a broker, be prepared for capacity to tighten a bit. So with that, turn it over to Dean, and he'll walk us through our market update.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, on Journal of Commerce yesterday, they said that Ningbo is opening up tomorrow, so it's been shut down for just over a week, which is good news on the Trans-Pacific trade lane. So starting off with the dry van load-to-truck ratio, volume stabilized last week, about the same as the week prior, relatively flat. Equipment post decreased slightly, just by 1%, had the combined effect of increasing the load-to-truck ratio to 5.76. I took a look at our top 100 lanes. They decreased on more lanes compared to the prior week. Volume was up on 41 lanes compared to 47 the week prior, but down on 52 compared to 42 the week prior, and neutral on 7 lanes. Moving over to the refrigerated load-to-truck ratio, volumes are much the same as in the dry van sector, relatively flat. Equipment posts are almost the same as the week prior also, and something that I've not seen before, the load-to-truck ratio actually stayed at the same level it was the prior week at 13.97. In terms of actual loads moved, evenly split across our top 70 reefer lanes, 45% were up last week, 45% were down, 10% were neutral. Moving over to the load-to-truck ratio and flatbed load post volumes decreased for the third week, dropping by about 3% week over week. Capacity eased slightly. That pushed the load-to-truck ratio down to 40.94. So moving over to the intermodal story as it relates to the market condition index that Ken spoke about in dry van. A lot of intermodal congestion is forcing shippers that have an endpoint in Chicago or further east to try and transload to avoid some of the panic that's going on. A lot of congestion, a lot of landlocked rail yards, not designed for the volume of freight that's coming into the Midwest, especially from the West Coast. So truckload is picking up some of that slack. As a result, spot rates on some of those big intermodal lanes like Chicago, Atlanta, up 41 cents last week to an average of 332. Another busy intermodal lane for e-commerce into the warehouse market of Allentown. Chicago to Allentown, the rates increased 6 cents to 336, excluding fuel. Chicago to Harrisburg, another busy lane for e-commerce. It's also a capacity challenged intermodal lane right at the moment. Rates up 30 cents a mile to to $4.11, excluding fuel. Chicago to the Northeast Intermodal ramp in my part of the world in Worcester, Mass. Average rate in this lane was $3.25 last week, up about 3 cents. And Chicago to Dallas rates are up 16 cents a mile to $2.67.
Not to break your flow, Dean, but the reason you're walking through some of that for folks less familiar is we're trying to get a sense of what trucking rates are doing in the similar area of major intermodal thoroughfares, right?
Right.
To try to kind of proxy if we're seeing the capacity is a lot more kind of fixed, right, on the intermodal side. You can't just kind of flood it with spot capacity the way, I mean, trains don't work that way.
Yeah.
That's what I've been told.
Well, for the last year, I've been watching closely the import volumes as they come into all the ports, and you can see a direct correlation with volume of TEUs, containers, and then load post volumes that sort of come after that in a number of days, even weeks. But right now, every mode has got tight capacity, whether it's air cargo, rail, ocean, even road. So capacity is tight everywhere, and it's just looking for, it's a bit like water's trying to find its path of least resistance. And right now, in terms of moving freight, the least resistance, where there's the least friction, is in the truckload side, because it's more nimble, more agile, and can get freight moved quicker. All right, so back to the weekly market update. Refrigerated market condition index. I focused a little bit on the upstate market of New York this week in the Elmira market. We don't give them much love at all over the course of the year. Not a big market, but very pivotal right now in the refrigerated space. The vegetable crop hits top gear, mostly cabbage and onions. They make up about 85% of the volume. Rates out of Elmira have been steadily climbing since the season started in early July. Spot rates out of Elmira are now double in the last 4 weeks. They were $1.51 a mile 4 weeks ago, now $3.10 a mile. That's the average reefer rate out of that market. Most of the volume goes to Hunts Point in Brooklyn. From Kings Ferry is kind of the epicenter of the veggie market, $5.31 a mile from Kings Ferry to Hunts Point. Kings Ferry to Boston, even higher at $5.76 a mile. And loads west to Chicago are much lower this week, paying $2.44 for the 684-mile run. Having a look at flatbed, this week I had a look at the Baker Hughes rig count, top 500 for the first time in a year. That's more than double. There's a correlation between the number of rigs drilling for oil and gas and the amount of loads that are for drilling, casing and things like that. I took a look at the North Dakota Montana market up near the Bacon. Flatbed loads are up 72% month over month to that oil field. Spot rates from Houston to Bismarck increased by $1.38 a mile since the start of this year, now averaging $3.23 a mile. Loads west to El Paso up again for the second week, increased by 6% week over week. That's 4 straight weeks of volume gains on that lane. That's loads moved. But capacity to D's, there was a 38 cents per mile decrease in spot rates to an average of $2.98 last week. So wrapping up with our year-over-year look at spot rates, starting off with the dry van. Spot rates took a pause last week and remained flat at $2.43 a mile, excluding fuel. And that's interesting. It was going against seasonal trends the week prior. So a little bit of leveling off. Still 44 cents a mile higher than this time last year, and 62 cents a mile higher than 2018. And on our top 100 lanes, spot rates were neutral on almost a third of the lanes, up on 29 lanes, but down on 37. They were only down 22 lanes the week prior. So more lanes are moving downwards than up. Reefer spot rates, year-over-year view, decreased by a cent per mile, just over a cent per mile to $2.77, following 2 weeks of gains, still 58 cents a mile higher than this time last year. And looking at our top 70 reefer lanes, rate movement was evenly split. A third were up, a third were down, and a third remained unchanged. And wrapping up with our flatbed year-over-year view, spot rates dropped another penny per mile last week. They've been decreasing steadily over the last 6 weeks and down 8 cents a mile over that time frame, still 59 cents a mile higher than the same week last year and about 19 cents a mile higher than the same time in 2018. For those still with us and missed the start of the show, that's it for the market update on the recorded side. But if you'd like to find out more about what's going on in the freight market update, go to dat.com/market update and download our weekly market report that'll be out tomorrow. Over to you, Ned, for the short term.
All right. So we're going to start off by looking at the spot rate forecast. So in blue, you can see the market rates observed by DAT. And then off to the right, you can see our couple of strands of spaghetti. So In red is our short-term forecast, and that's expecting rates to be flat to slightly up, maybe up a couple of pennies over the next month. Whereas in green, our ratecast model is a fair bit more bullish, where it's expecting a raise of nearly about 5 to 8 cents over that same time period. And then in the middle, in gold and silver, we have our two blended forecasts, which are mixtures of the two forecasts in different amounts and in different ways. And for these two forecasts, they're leaning much more towards the ratecast forecast and the short-term forecast, suggesting that there is, surprisingly enough, some ceiling still left, some room still left below the spot rate ceiling on dry van. Next, moving forward to, reefer. Once more, you can see in blue the market rates observed by DAT. And then off to the right, you can see 4 different forecasts once more. In red is the short-term forecast, which is holding steady, no real growth up or down, one way or the other. And then in green, you can see the ratecast model. The ratecast model is expecting rates to rise heading into the next couple of weeks, again by about 5 to 7 cents. It's pretty substantial, actually. And then in contrast to the van rates, the van forecast here, the blended forecasts in gold and silver are leaning more towards the short term than the ratecast model. Finally, moving into the flatbed sector, once more we have in blue the spot rates observed.
Where it'll be the most effective because they don't know until it makes landfall, but FEMA will typically stage a lot of that volume within 4 to 5 hours of predicted landfall. So you see a lot of volume moving into those Birmingham markets in particular. Kind of, if you draw a 500-mile radius around some of the big Air Force base in Birmingham, you can be there under a day to wherever landfall is.
Can those materials run along the south of the country and avoid Chicago?
More likely to come around via the Panama Canal into New Orleans and Houston via ship. That's what we've been seeing is more volume that way.
Nice.
But at least they could.
Yeah.
But you still got to get through the choke point around Los Angeles.
No, I think that's going to be capacity is already so tight. I mean,
Right.
We were just talking about that in terms of Intermodal's completely shot through. I mean, what is there left to push on to try and force through more of anything?
I think everything's fully stretched,
Yeah.
Especially for intermodal moves, right? It's not so much the ports. If you talk to the ports out there, they'll tell you that their throughput's good. They're handling the vessels that are coming in. They're bunching. The vessel that's been there the longest is just over 2 weeks. So there's still a big backlog there, but their throughput is quite good. The biggest issue is the choke points inland. The inland intermodal points, they're the ones that are causing the biggest challenge right now. And it's really hard to move those surging volumes when you've got such space capacity issues. Some of those rail yards in Chicago are 95% full in terms of their footprint. So they're actually bursting at the seams. It's very hard for them to move volume quickly. And of course, everybody's panicking because they're trying to get all of that retail freight into warehouses for peak shipping season. So when you talk to the rail experts, that's not going to work its way out of the system anytime soon. So I think that inland intermodal congestion is the biggest issue, which is forcing shippers to try and end their inland movement at the port, which is really difficult for them to do once the bill of lading's already been established and the pricing's been done. So I suspect some of them will be trying to reroute vessels and change the delivery point of the cargo to points like Houston, as you sort of mentioned, to get that volume to its destination.
Do you expect that there to be like a long-term hysteresis effect? Because we've now had several months of just extremely, extremely tight capacity, and there hasn't been, because Class 8 truck orders have been delayed, and because the lead time on like establishing more rail capacity is so long. Right. Do you think at some point like the additional supply of capacity is going to come through and then just completely swamp, or is it just going to?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, no, I know.
I just don't know how long that lasts next year.
Yeah,
because they're talking about 12 months right now
before
those new orders come out of the factories. So we're talking about August next year. I just don't have a crystal ball.
No. I mean, Q1, end of Q1, start of Q2. If we don't, I mean, that'll be another major disruption, right? Something will have to happen to keep. I mean, they're not all going to come at once and like a nice, gift wrapped package, right? They're going to trickle in, and I would suspect that they're going to start making a dent in the capacity issues sometime in Q1, really starting to hit the stride in Q2. Would be my guess.
Isn't a lot of it still lane imbalance? I mean, there's got to be a lot of backhaul being run empty right now, and that effectively cuts into capacity whether the trucks are there or not.
Right. Especially when you look at some of those lanes that are, well north of $5 a mile, where you could not even worry about looking for a backhaul and just do one round trip every day, like Las Vegas, Phoenix, out of Los Angeles.
And as we start to switch back away from the things that we were buying during the pandemic to different sort of things, doesn't that just set up the imbalance? And
sure, different packaging, different supply chains.
Density will kind of assuage some of the imbalance, though. I mean, density kind of helps, and then all of a sudden it starts to hurt when you become saturated, and then you have too much competition for freight, and then the rates tank, and that's kind of usually the driver of the inversion of the cycle. But right now, I think you're seeing a lot of shortage of capacity driving imbalance, where they're running routes and corridors that they typically wouldn't because there's no latent capacity sitting there. It doesn't have to be a power unit either; it could be a trailer. The lack of trailers right now. Especially if it's like live load and unload, if that you're having to pivot more to live load and unload, that's much more inefficient than drop and hook from a time perspective. So let's get to some questions. If anyone has any questions, again, feel free to drop them in the chat or comment section below. We have one.
Let's ask that. Josh Hilton seems to have a couple of questions. Do you mind scrolling up, Dean? In the, I'm gonna.
Why would okay?
Yeah, pardon.
It's a question about bulk tankers.
I'm looking for some market data around food grade bulk tanker. Do you know of a good source for that? Josh Hilton asks.
Oh.
I don't. It's a pretty rare data commodity.
Yeah.
Market level data.
You can shoot us a note at askiq@dat.com. We might have the FMIC data might have some sporadic signal, if you will, around. I know that they have a bulk model. I don't know how much. I mean, you're starting to really cut it.
If you have access to FMCSA data sources, you can look in the special commodities field and just do a search for food grade bulk tanker and pull out just those drugs. But then you got to merge that to something else to give you rates or volume data.
That's an interesting. So as we start to pivot away from, eventually people are going to start going about doing things. We're doing things. Things are happening. I think the demand for the more bulk packaging, not just for tanker, but in general, probably going to swing back to that commercial demand, and that could really drive demand there. Whereas now it might be in retail packaging in the back of the flatbed or refrigerated normal trailer.
A lot of those fleets, the ones that ran the bulk commodities, just from an anecdotal glance, seem to go out of business in mid 2021. So I don't know where those trucks went or where that capacity went either. And as we swing back to that, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, no, for sure. That is a really interesting kind of dynamic to watch as we continue to kind of tick along in the pandemic.
All right. Looks like we have one more question from Josh Hilton. Why would carriers buy more trucks if the trucks they have aren't seated?
We're not seeing evidence of that. So I have not seen or heard any anecdotal evidence of kind of widespread trucks sitting empty without drivers. Have you, Dean?
No, not as much as I think what Josh is sort of suggesting, but the other reason is trade cycles, right? So you're always buying new trucks because your trucks are always aging and you want to keep the average age of the fleet at a certain level, especially those large fleets that run operating leases where they turn them over every 3 years. So you've constantly got to be, and I'll use some hedging your bets to make sure you've got trucks coming in next year and trying to estimate, how many trucks you'll need relative to where demand will be. That's why they're ordering trucks now, because they're fairly bullish, I think, on where they think demand will be this time next year.
Yeah, I think the bigger question, I almost look at this as the opposite. We don't really know the current status of the kind of acute driver shortage because these trucks that have been ordered haven't been delivered, right? So it's, right. I think the lack of tangible, like physical capacity is masking some of the potential shortage and sort of the soft capacity being the driver. And I think that'll be really interesting as it plays out and these trucks get delivered. Do we have the demand for truck drivers? I think the fleets, the asset-based fleets for sure, are trying to get ahead of this with their pay increases. I mean, there was a just absolute sizzling hot take from the ATA a few weeks ago that these pay increases may do more harm than good, which I sort of vehemently disagree with. But, they are hard to claw back. But the market, the contract, most of this freight, most of what we're talking about is isolated to the spot market. Contract rates will rectify. They always do. And that's what will pull the volume out of the spot market. And then therefore, sorry, we just had a visitor. We're in our CEO's office, by the way. So this isn't a studio. Yeah. No, we can't open the windows and show you the mountains, but it is, take our word for it, it is quite delightful.
Yes.
But anyway, that's what we're talking about. So the contract market will add the extra revenue coming in to help subsidize these driver pay increases. And look, it's interesting out there. I mean, where I live in Ohio, there's billboards to go drive for fast food companies pushing 6 figures, day cab work. I mean, it's nighttime work. You have to go in and out of a cooler, but you get a cool logo jacket and you get to go do that. And it's a lot, it's a very healthy increase over what they were paying even a year and a half ago. So
I think there's actually a structural change going on though, that with the driver supply piece that I've not seen before. And it's a demographic, right? So the younger demographic is a smaller demographic and not growing as fast. And then the major portion of long haul truck drivers has been the baby boom generation, which is a bubble that's moving quickly out of the workforce. And it was accelerated in Q3 of last year. There were 3.2 million more retired in Q3 of 20. So I think there's been a structural shift in the labor pool that typically comes into the long-haul truckload market. I mean, on our show before Christmas, we said that capacity will be tight, especially in the long-haul sector, because it's a less attractive sector. It's also the entry level for a lot of new drivers coming into the industry to get their CDL. With all the problems with schools and COVID, that pipeline has slowed down. So that's why we're seeing a lot more tight capacity in that sector.
Are there things that people can do to try and increase driver retention or?
Well, yeah. And that's
why
other
than just pay. Yeah.
Well, that's why Josh's question is that's why they buy new trucks.
Right.
So you're always buying new trucks to make sure it's part of your retention and recruiting program is have the best trucks, more so with the best and latest safety technology. So you can put a really good safety net around new drivers who don't have the experience but need that support net around them. That's part of the reason that they have a pretty aggressive trade cycle, because technology developments are fairly rapid these days.
Cool. All right, one more that just snuck in under the wire.
Josh Hilton once more. Thanks, all. Curious about your perspective on long unload times at receivers and how we better work with carriers to not only understand these challenges, but how we can keep drivers engaged.
I think one of the hardest things to teach a new transportation analyst is that the unit of measure isn't miles, it's hours, especially with ELDs, right?
Right.
So you have 14 hours on the clock, 11 driving, right, Dean?
Correct.
Sorry, it's been a while. And if you're, so just kind of like level set, capacity shortage doesn't have to be a lack of physical equipment or drivers. If we take 30 minutes out of every shipment at each end for loading and unloading, that's an hour. That's a massive reduction in capacity if that's happening network wide. So I think the way to, and Dean can maybe speak more to like specific tactics, but ultimately I think your carriers, especially in this market, are going to be much more in tune to what these delays are costing them. And it will in turn end up costing you as the shipper.
Yeah.
Even if like you're the consignee, like you're sending it to your consignee, I think getting on the horn and having a conversation with them of how that's impacting your transportation budget may be very prudent, because there is not nearly as much slack in this system as there was 18 to 24 months ago. But
I mean, deadhead's another big capacity drain.
Huge.
Like if you're having to deadhead, and especially if you're more asset based, making sure that your trucks are positioned where they need can help increase your effective capacity, because again, you're getting more bang for your buck per truck.
Right. The other thing is to avoid, Josh, is to make sure you don't get drivers into the mindset of hurry up and wait, right? Because a lot of drivers will rush to get there thinking that they've got to make this window, this appointment window, only to be ignored, told to go and park outside, not allowed to use rest facilities, and be left in the dark. And what you don't realize is they've taken incredible risks to get there. So my advice would be to communicate long before the driver gets there, reset the expectations around what they can expect when they get there, communicate with them, let them know that you know they're there, and then get them on and off the dock as quick as you can. They're the sorts of things you can do to keep capacity coming back to you, because there's nothing more frustrating for a driver than to be completely ignored and not unloaded when they thought you would be unloading them.
So on the shipper side of this, though, would it be if you could get better information on when the actual arrival of the truck will be?
Right.
So hiring people to load and unload at docks and having them wait around has to be really hard right now too,
Right.
with the labor shortages.
Well, a lot of the shipments sort of single transactions. There's no real integration across warehouse management systems and truckload TMS systems. So you can actually integrate the location data of the truck into your appointment system and the flow of how you unload trucks at docks and which dock to pick.
Mm-hmm.
So that just doesn't exist, in a way that could make a substantial difference to the industry. It's a bit like how the airline industry works with slots when everyone just backs up across the planet.
Right.
If we could do the same thing in truckload, it'd save a lot of the problems, because drivers could then time their breaks differently en route so that they were there on time and ready to go, as opposed to stopping somewhere and then realizing that they've actually missed their window because there's no visibility.
Yeah.
That sounds like an interesting area for development for software solutions.
or the blockchain.
Yeah.
Hey, no.
The
All right.
blockchain.
All right. The blockchain.
All right, so that I think we're pushing it at this point. I don't want anything to go wrong. We're kind of finishing strong. So I want to thank everyone who stuck with us through this broadcast. We hope to do more of this. We've optioned the second half of this floor in this lovely office building, and we're going to hopefully get a more permanent studio so we can do this stuff more often, but we really appreciate it. I don't know if we have a slide for it, but we have DATCon coming up in October, pending the whole country doesn't devolve into a Mad Max type landscape.
That's in September.
It's in October. The Mad Max.
No,
We'll be out of it. We'll go down to the Winchester, have a pint, wait for the whole thing to blow over.
Yeah.
I don't know my Greek alphabet. We'll be on the Omega variant by then, and then it's all over because you can't go any further. Tactics. But yeah, so Terry Bradshaw is going to be there. We have a ton of really great content lined up. We'll be there doing this show live. Lots of great sessions. It's the first time we've ever had shippers, carriers, and brokers in one place all at the same time. So really good place to network. We'll start in the coming weeks talking about other shows we'll be at, assuming they're going on. We have CSCMP coming up, the big shipper conference. The McLeod conference will be coming up. I know TIA has, they used to call Technovations, and I think they slotted in an equally interesting name. I think it's now called 3PL Extend. But lots of stuff coming up, again, assuming people actually get vaccinated and the country gets back to normal. So with that,
I believe.
I want to thank everyone. We all flew out here just for this, believe it or not. So, no, just kidding. But I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank Dean and Cynthia and Ned for joining me, and hope everyone has a great week, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.